Now, when it comes to video games, no other company has brought a lot to my heart over the years than Nintendo. Nintendo has always been a company that's been really innovative. They brought gaming back from the dead, and they, of course, are very smart when it comes to creating video games. But do I think that the company has always been perfect over the years? Well, for me, I don't think so. I think the companies always have, they've always had greatest achievements and they've always had biggest flops. But a company must have achievements and they must have flops in order for a company to be as big as how you see Nintendo today. Now, a lot of people always tend to say, the Virtual Boy is the biggest failure in the company's history, which I do say that it is, but not the biggest. I do agree that Nintendo's biggest failure has to be them creating their own competition, which would be known as the PlayStation. So, in this episode of Let's Talk, episode 3, I will be giving my honest opinion. Was it smart for Nintendo to create which would become their ultimate and most fearful competition of all time and currently to this day? But before I talk about the Nintendo and Sony deal, I must go back to Nintendo's roots on how they became a big global gaming company. Now, at the time, Nintendo, of course, was a small company, and they were trying to enter the gaming market, which they did successfully with arcades. But now they were trying to enter with the home market. So, in 1983, Nintendo would go on to create the Nintendo Family Computer, which shortly dubbed the Famicom, which was, of course, the Japanese Nintendo Entertainment System. The Famicom will gain global success in Japan, of course. Japan realized that the Famicom was one of their biggest marquees when it came to technology. While in the US, of course, video games weren't really a big thing anymore. In 1983, of course, the video game market had come to a crash, and nobody was really interested in video games anymore, of course, due to the lack of success of the Atari 2600, of the ColecoVision, of many Pong clones, as well as the MSN Arcadia. Basically, like a bunch of consoles were released and a bunch of low, poor quality games. And nobody was interested in, playing video games anymore here in the US. But that would all change. In 1984, Nintendo would secretly release the Nintendo Entertainment System, of course, as a toy. But people still knew that it was a video game, and they weren't tricked. They knew that this was a video game. But a lot of people got interested in the NES. A lot of people enjoyed it, and they thought that this looked better than anything that they've ever seen, of course. But the NES wouldn't gain global mainstream success until 1985 when a game called Super Mario Brothers was released, and which, of course, sell a bunch of copies and would make the NES a global powerhouse. Now we must look at how Sony was able to actually partner up with Nintendo and, of course, help them in the next few years. Now, during the late 80s, a man named Ken Kutaragi, who was one of Sony's most powerful hardware engineers, was, of course, very interested in video games when he saw his younger daughter playing the Famicom. And he thought, well, this is something he's never seen before, but it looks interesting and he wants to create something like that. One of the things that Ken Kutaragi only despised about the Famicom system was the sound. Now, at the time, Nintendo games weren't really the best thing when it came to sound development. Now, they didn't have the best chips or anything like that to create a powerful sound that can balance, the game's effects. But of course, Ken Kutaragi believed that if you create a chip that could be placed on the Famicom, this would balance the sound of course, the game. And he would talk to Sony's CEO at the time to actually create the sound chip for Nintendo and try to kind of get interested in the video game market itself. At the time, Sony CEO said no because he wasn't very interested in video games, and he didn't believe video games wouldn't be a powerful giant piece of technology that would be, as successful as, at the time as that people would imagine it'd be. Um, of course, I do I do see that this was the point where Sony believed that, well, video games weren't didn't mean a thing to them, but they also saw that video games were becoming something unique, something really awe-inspiring. Like they basically saw that there is something that is very creative, and this is something that makes people feel that it's relaxing, it's fun, and it's enjoyable, and they wanted to be a part of it too. So Sony's CEO, of course, did give Ken Kuturagi's permission to actually create the sound chip for Nintendo. At the time, Nintendo was about to create their 16-bit system, the Super Famicom. And of course, that's when Sony approached Nintendo. Hey, we got this new sound chip that we actually want to actually insert to the Super Famicom. We believe that this sound chip could, of course, balance the sound effects of any game. And of course, Nintendo trusted and believed Sony, and they've actually tested the sound chip, and of course, all the games sounded perfectly. They sounded well balanced now, and they didn't see any effect with the sound anymore. And then this gave the opportunity of Nintendo to create, of course, a partnership with Sony, a long time partnership, of course. And they believe that this partnership can, help them in many ways to also not just reinvent the industry, but to see that there's a lot of opportunities to work with certain companies that can basically make anyone feel that video games are not just to play, but they're also something to feel like it's creative. This also gave the opportunity of Sony to make a deal with Nintendo on making a console with them as well. This console that Nintendo and Sony would plan would be not technically a new console, but a different version of the Super Famicom, and make make a add-on to it. Now, of course, at the time, add-ons were kind of useful things when it came to consoles. The Sega Genesis was one example of that. And the Sega Genesis is one of the greatest consoles of all time, hands down. But when Sega would go on to release add-ons like the Sega CD and the 32X, nobody really cared, and they were poorly received add-ons, and they weren't as good as people would imagine them to be. I do believe that, of course, Sega did fail with the add-ons, but the reason why Sega wanted to make those add-ons is because have they wanted to have more popularity. They wanted to basically feel like they were number one. They wanted to make Nintendo feel like we got a more powerful hardware engine that can basically destroy you guys. Because at the time, Sega wanted to be number one in the industry. They understood that, but making those add-ons is what, of course, drove Sega downhill. So, of course, Nintendo did allow Sony to make an add-on for the Super Famicom because at the time, a lot of people really, a lot of people were really interested in CDs at the time. They weren't really interested in cartridges anymore because CDs were able to hold more megabytes than cartridges had. A CD at the time could hold, I think, 16 megabytes, while a cartridge can own 8.64 megabytes, which wasn't enough RAM to basically hold up a game. But they felt that CDs could, and CDs could bring in a more powerful features that a cartridge couldn't have. So, of course, this gave the idea of Sony creating games for their new console with Nintendo. But this is where the deal goes downhill. So Sony secretly wanted to basically own all the rights of all of Nintendo's licensed franchises, and they wanted to own all the revenue for this new console. Nintendo would kind of find out, and they would actually ask Sony, like, is it kind of true that you guys want to have more of that revenue and give less of that to us? Sony wanted more of that money, and they wanted more of the license of all of Nintendo's franchises. Nintendo was afraid to lose their franchises, and they were afraid that they wouldn't get that their big revenue as they promised it'd make for them, of course. So the only way Nintendo thought of themselves at the time to get themselves out of this deal was, of course, Nintendo decided to actually make a secret deal with Sony's rival Philips. And this would give Nintendo the opportunity to show them their new Super Nintendo CD add-on console. And Philips was really interested because they actually wanted to work in the video game market as well. And so they worked on the deal. And in the 1994 Consumer Electronics Show, which was E3 at the time, Sony planned a big event for not just them, but of course with their deal with Nintendo. So Sony would unveil, which was dubbed at the time, the Nintendo PlayStation Super Disc system. And they were supposed to discuss the features and everything of what the console was all about. And in Nintendo's booth, of course, they would present which was the Super Nintendo PlayStation at the time. Nintendo was very confused when they first saw the console because they said, "What are you guys talking about? We're making a deal with Philips. You guys are done." Like they cut him off, and Sony's CEO, after the event, felt that that was one of the most biggest disgraceful moves that any company has ever done to overcross them. And this gave the opportunity of Sony creating which would have been the PlayStation, which of course then came to be. Sony was able to prove that they didn't needed Nintendo's help, or they didn't needed a certain company's help to make their console, which would be one of the greatest consoles to be ever made, of course, and would be the most powerful competition that Nintendo would not even, of course, dare to see back then. But Kent Kutaragi did believe that after the deal that they could still be big to Nintendo and that they don't need Nintendo's help, and that's what led to the creation of the PlayStation. And the PlayStation was one of the first 3D consoles to basically outsmart and outmatch Nintendo's sales and Nintendo's popularity revenue. This gave the opportunity to let gamers know that it's not just about Nintendo and Sega ruling the gaming industry, that there are other companies that could be morally creative and could bring it into the table. So of course the Sony PlayStation would become Nintendo's biggest and most fearful competition over the years. So what happened between the deal with Nintendo and Philips? Well, the Super Nintendo or the Super Famicom disk system never came to be, as Nintendo would cancel it, and Nintendo would form a partnership with Silicon Graphics to create, of course, their next 64-bit 3D system, which would be known as later the Nintendo 64, of course. And from that standpoint, Nintendo was still able to, to basically impress people with their new hardware, of course. But there was a lot of people that were trying to ditch, Nintendo's side and try to go with Sony because a lot of people love what Sony did. Sony brought in more stuff to the table that no other gaming company has done. They basically added in new features, and they basically made games that made sense to play. I mean, like, you had games like Crash Bandicoot, Twisted Metal. And these were games that you don't see on normal consoles, but these were games that made you feel like, hey, this is something new. This is something we don't see, but this is something rather creating. And of course, then games like Final Fantasy VII would come out, and it would prove to how the PlayStation is the biggest thing in existence. So going back to the Nintendo Philips deal, so Nintendo would allow Philips to create games on their licensed property, of course, for the horrendous Philips CDI console. If you guys don't know what the CDI is, I don't blame you. The CDI is basically well, of course, it's a CD compact player, which basically was kind of like a cable box, but it wasn't meant to be a gaming system at the time. It was meant to be just a home player to allow to play, educational videos or just anything. And they made video games of it. So, I do see that all of the games of the CDI did suck. I mean, I've never was a big fan of the CDI, and I didn't enjoy anything of the CDI. Of course, there were only, I think, 4 games that they created for the CDI of Nintendo properties. The first one was Hotel Mario. Hotel Mario was sort of like an homage to Donkey Kong. So the whole plot of the game was just basically to close doors in hotels. Yep, that's all you do. Close doors and close doors. That's all you freaking do. And there's nothing that can get so bad and so hilarious than those horrendous cutscenes. I don't recommend them, but if you want to watch them, go watch the YouTube poop contents. I think they're really funny, and it's better than watching the actual thing. Other than that, I was not. I just hated that game. I don't talk about it. And then 3 shitty Zelda games: Link, The Faces of Evil, Zelda, The One of Gamelon, and yep, you guessed it, Zelda's Adventure. Now, guys, the Zelda games on the CDI are pretty bad, like really, really, really bad. They're to me, since I'm a huge Zelda fan, and Zelda's my number one gaming series of all time. To me, those games are a disgrace. They are. The gameplay sucks. They tried to kind of make the gameplay somehow similar to Zelda 2, but it's nothing like Zelda. Even if you play it, it's horrendously stupid. I mean, those games were just horrible, horrendous. I mean, they're nothing like Zelda. Even the cutscenes. If you guys bother with them, just go watch YouTube poop. They make the cutscenes more funnier, in my opinion. But other than that, the games themselves are notoriously horrible. I'm glad I don't own a CDI, because the CDI is one of those consoles I don't like. I mean, I would like to collect it because I do want to collect every single system in existence. Other than that, yeah, that's another talk for another time. But other than that, those Zelda games are bad. They're really bad. Zelda's Adventure is it's a whatever game, but it's just boring. Still boring dialogue, boring cutscenes, just everything boring. Zelda's Adventure is surprisingly the rarest CDA game for people to actually find. The game is actually worth $100. So if you guys own a CDI and you have a copy of the game, hold it, because that game is gold. It is really gold. For a CDA game, it's gold. It's gold. Um, Other than that, yeah. So the whole, I mean, oh yeah, let's not forget there was supposed to be another Mario game for the CDI. The game was called Super Mario's Wacky World, and it would have had Mario traveling through the entire world. It was going to be a sequel to Super Mario World. I actually see gameplay of it, and it didn't look that bad. But the game, I guess, could have been more better than Hotel Mario, in my opinion. But other than that, we know that it would have sucked. Though I mean, like, the CDI was a big failure to the gaming industry, and it still is, and nobody even talks about it. I don't, but I only am because of this video for the history brief knowledge. Other than that, yeah, the whole Super Nintendo add-on, the CD add-on didn't happen. Sony went their separate ways. They created the PlayStation, and they became one of the most biggest global gaming houses of all time, and you know what I mean by that. Um, yeah, and I mean, but Nintendo was still able to be as big as it was, and it still is. I mean, do I think was this a good decision of Nintendo creating their ultimate competition? Do I think this was a good idea or a bad idea? Well, I have it mixed. Okay, I would always think of it as really a big failure because Nintendo didn't realize that if with them cutting their deal off with Sony, this meant a lot of loss and this meant a lot of opportunities what Sony could have done to succeed themselves over Nintendo's popularity. And it made Sony realize that, hey, we don't need Nintendo. We have our own technology, we have our own hardware. We can make our own video games, we can be successful, and we can kick ass. And they did. But do I think was this a big failure? Well, for a company standpoint, I mean, Nintendo wouldn't acknowledge it, but they kind of do see it though. But nowadays it's like whatever. Sony really doesn't care anymore because Sony is big, as big as you can imagine now. I mean, the PS2 is one of their most biggest and their most successful selling consoles of all time, selling 17 million units. Can you believe that? Of course, both the PS2 and the Nintendo DS are the most successful selling consoles. But it proved that Sony could be big with video games, and they proved that they can kick ass, and they proved that they can be creative, and they proved that they don't have to be a company like Sega. They don't have to be a company like Nintendo. They could be themselves and have other gaming developing studios to see how creative they could be with their new system. You know, Nintendo was still able to have still a little bit of success. I mean, to me, I love the N64. It is one of my most favorite Nintendo consoles. I think to me it's better than PlayStation. Well, to me, because it's one of those consoles that I grew up with. But I mean, it's not the first console I played, but it is the first console that I technically owned. And the console brought a lot to my heart over the years. I mean, it was able to bring a lot of great memories, with families and all. I just love what the 64 did. I mean, at the time, I never got to play the PlayStation, the first one, that much. The only game I was only able to play growing up from the first PS1 was, the PS1, yeah, was Final Fantasy VII. And to me, that was like my first sort of experience to RPGs because, at the time, I know people would talk shit about RPGs because RPGs weren't as big as they were in Japan. In the US, RPGs weren't popular. But when Final Fantasy VII came out, it proved to you RPGs aren't your ordinary typical video games. They're not side scrolling, or they're just basically not. They're not, they're not easy games, but they're very entertaining and more interactive games. But the PS1 at the time, I remember when I would see commercials of all the games, and when I would see people playing the games on store displays and all, I would see that this console was very innovative. I see it as somehow like just another step of what video games were about. And and when I would have that more experience, when I would get my PS2 when the PS2 came out, I would see, man, like, Nintendo is not the only company that is kicking ass, but there are other companies that can prove that, they have the guts to say, yeah, that we have more software entertainment to prove that, you know, that we that but Sony is able to just bring it to the table, like that's what I think. But do I think was this a bad decision? Well, I mean, then I'd say, no, because if we didn't have that whole deal going wrong, we wouldn't have big competition to this day. For who knows, we'd still be playing Nintendo, we still be playing Sega, and that would not be real competition, because to me, Nintendo would be like the only company to succeed, and I wouldn't like that. To be honest, even if I love Nintendo, I wouldn't love for them just to be succeeding. Sega would be failing because Sega didn't step up their game after the Saturn's failure. They blew it off. They nailed the plug, and then with the Dreamcast's release, the Dreamcast was like their final nail in the coffin and saying, "You guys can't do it anymore." I mean, like really, Sega, if you would still have Nintendo and Sega going together, I don't like going against each other. It just wouldn't make sense, like to have big competition. So with that whole deal going wrong, we wouldn't have PlayStation. Hell, we wouldn't even have the Xbox. So that's why I think that this deal did revolutionize something. It gave us big competition. It gave us other opportunities to see and to explore the whole world of video games. And I definitely think it was a smart choice for a company. And sure, I mean, I understand Nintendo or Sony may not see it, but if you think about it, we wouldn't have the PlayStation or we wouldn't have the Xbox to this day. And that's why I think it's a smart decision for a company to do something like that. I personally believe that I have my feelings mixed, but I do think, at the end of the day, you do see that there are more stuff now to explore in gaming with PS4 and Xbox One. You can see that there's just more stuff to explore now with features like using apps and just basically, playing online games. That's just something we never thought we would imagine. See, we would not have online gaming to this day if it wasn't for that deal. But I do agree that as a company standpoint, it's not the best move, but you're seeing something revolutionary now, you know? So that's why I think that it's a smart move. But I can't say yes or no if it was a mistake because I have mixed. But I do think at the end of the day, we were able to see more of video games. We were able to see more, and that's why I think that you know to this day still Nintendo is still revolutionizing the industry. Sure, the company, like I said, is not always perfect, but they've always have these opportunities to revolutionize what the whole industry was all about. And like I said, if it wasn't for that, no PlayStation, no Xbox, it'd still be Nintendo and Sega, and I wouldn't like that. But yeah, it's a mixed, but I will say that that's my opinion. I say that it's mixed. What are your guys' opinion? What do you guys think? Do you guys think this was something Nintendo cost themselves to? Like, did this really cost Nintendo's company to basically go downhill because of that deal? Or do you think it was a smart move because, Nintendo really kind of revolutionized this idea of having big competition? And do you think this was really smart or do you think this was a dumb decision? Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. What do you guys think of this deal? Going bad or going good? I mean, what do you think? But that's it for Let's Talk episode 3, and I hope you guys enjoyed it because this is a topic I've been wanting to do for a while, and I always ask myself that as well. Was this a smart decision or not? I mean, I can't say yes or no because I haven't mixed, but let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and if you like this video, give it a like, subscribe. Stay tuned for more content, enjoy more videos here in the annotations. But anyway, guys, that's episode 3 of Let's Talk Triforce Otsuku Master 2000. I know I've been away for a while. Currently, right now, my throat kind of hurts a little bit, so I'm not. I didn't plan to make this video long, but I guess since it's Let's Talk, I had to. So it was a big sacrifice there, and I did it for you guys. I did it because I wanted to, and I didn't care. But yeah, just yeah, I'm just glad if you guys enjoyed it. Just give it a like, share it. Yeah. Well, anyway, guys, that about wraps up, and I hope you enjoyed, and see you next time.